Welcome to Everything is Dead, the show where we challenge the myths of B2B and uncover how go to market professionals are thriving in channels everyone says are dead. Today, we're diving into all things partnerships with Bob Moore, CEO at Crossbeam. Bob, welcome to the show, mate.
Hey, great to be here. Always a pleasure. Love the show. Love your accent. What's not to love? I'm happy to dig in.
Yeah, and I think this one's of particular kind of importance to me because I've long been an advocate for partnerships, been in partnerships role before, obviously diving into the full revenue role here at SensePark. So I'm excited
Yeah.
to dig into this one. As is common with the show, I'm gonna open up with a statement and just get your broad feedback, and then we can dig into some more tactical stuff. So if I said to you, Bob, partnerships are dead, how do you react to that statement fundamentally?
I think I would say partnerships died, and now like a phoenix rising from the ashes, the ecosystem-led growth movement is kind of replacing it wholesale,
Yep.
and it's bringing back a lot of the fundamentals around what makes sense about partnerships, but it's kind of infusing it with an entirely new set of approaches and tools to actually make it click in the modern go-to-market stack.
Yeah, I love it, mate. And for people listening that are maybe like partnership novices or hear this word ecosystem, right? Like, explain to me what you mean when you say ecosystem led or ecosystem based approach.
Yeah, I think so the word partnerships in general has a lot of baggage to it. And it's not a term that was created in the technology industry, nor is it a term that means the same thing to everybody who says it. Partnerships take so many different forms that it actually can create problems because your definition of what partnerships is and means and what effective partnerships are might be very, very different than your neighbors in your own industry, let alone a company in some other space. So, um, I think conventionally speaking, though, the concept of a partnership is this one-to-one relationship that exists between you and another entity in which you do work that creates more outputs than the sum of its parts, right? It's these 1+1 = 3 style collaborations that exist usually between companies that partner with one another to do things like hopefully build better products or sell more effectively or come up with joint ventures that result in some kind of customer value that's differentiated. So that one-to-one relationship is great, and there's like a fundamental model there that does work. But what has happened in the modern economy is that we've witnessed a bunch of these secular trends kind of coalescing into something a lot bigger, and because of that, the output is a lot of new playbooks and methodologies that don't just rely on one-to-one relationships, but instead become more and more and more powerful as you look at it through the 360-degree lens of your entire partner ecosystem. So I'll give a great example of this, which is Crossbeam is my third SaaS company. The last two were much nerdier than this, and this one's nerdy, so that's saying a lot. But they were in the data analytics space, and my second company was called Stitch Data. We were, if you know, like Fivetran or Matillion or any of those companies, we're kind of in that space. Data pipelines, middleware. So we help you suck all the data out of your SaaS tools and drop it into your data warehouse, and then it makes your business intelligence better. Well, I'll tell you what I experienced in that business. What I experienced was that the way that people buy software had really, really fundamentally changed in the even the 5 years that came before we started that company back around 2018. It used to be when you buy software, you buy it because you choose solution A over B because you love the user interface and you think it's built better, or because the sales rep was better at taking you to the golf course that you really wanted to go to, or there was some kind of pricing differentiation or deal making that happened. And what I saw at Stitch time and time again was there was a new dimension that was a key input to whether or not people would buy, which is how well our product fit into the stack of products that company was already using. If we had a prospect come in the door and they were already using Looker, we were going to win that deal. And we were heavily differentiated on a bunch of different dimensions from other players in the space in the way that we really seamlessly created outputs that worked super, super well with how Looker worked. And the Looker sales reps knew who we were and had kind of been enabled in a co-sell motion to kind of speak to the value of what we could do. And we basically built up a way in which we could win with a way, way higher percentage when this other technology solution existed. Well, Then we did the same thing, only we did it with Snowflake, the data warehouse. And then, we did it again with other BI tools, and eventually with an entire universe of these go-to-market partners that we had inside of this space that's now known as the modern data stack. And what we learned in that business was eventually we got to a place where 80% plus of the revenue coming in the door was revenue that would not have existed if not for there being a pre-existing stack kind of coming together that we slotted into. Now, why did this happen then and not 10 years before? I can geek out on like the emergence of the API economy and the success of the digital transformation movement. And even today, I think AI lowering the barriers for new products to get created creates this even greater unbundling effect, right? Which then means that in order to get a fully realized solution, you need to build a stack of individual point things that work really well together. But the net output, and this is the longest winded answer to your question about partnerships versus ecosystems, but the net output is that the way that you actually construct your go-to-market strategy needs to be ecosystem aware. And it can't just be aware of one partnership, right? Of one relationship. It needs to be aware of the totality of all of the partnerships that you have, and not just this hub and spoke of how you relate to those individual partners, but also how those partners relate to one another. Because that story, that ecosystem view on any given account or prospect that you're going after is the story of how you're going to win that account. And you can't do it with this individualized kind of, one-to-one view. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes it. And I think we're kind of living this at SenseSpark where we're in a position where we're an AI video platform, but fundamentally people still need to distribute these videos that we create through their sales engagement stack, right? Fundamentally. And so actually we came to that realization fairly early on that we needed to build decent integrations with all these sales engagement platforms for us to stand any chance of winning any deals. And so I think interoperability in any role is key, especially when you look at it through the lens of what's the core tool that my sales reps, and again, I use our use case as a way to kind of unpack this, but let's say our main tool is SalesLoft, right? Our sales reps are in SalesLoft every day. They're setting up sequences, etc. They can't have a different tool that they then need to go to, and then it doesn't integrate, and they're unable to use those two kind of harmoniously together. And so I actually think integration has been the primary reason that we win deals. Like if I look back at our wins and our losses holistically over the year, the ones where we lose is where our integrations aren't up to par. The ones we win is where we have a seamless integration. They can use them super easily. And so that definitely resonates. And I think for anybody listening to this podcast, it's either an early stage founder or even a founder that maybe lose deals to competitors, I'd really look at that component and see how it impacts win-loss rates, because I think you'd be interested in the results, right?
Yeah, and this is a really fun jumping off point, because what you're describing is such an incredible slam dunk use case for this stuff, right? Which is it's an input to your product strategy, and it's an input to the way in which you formulate the value story to your customers, right? Like it's kind of fundamentally there, and that's great. And I'm an old I was an improv comedy performer for years, and there's this saying that I stole from the improv world that I love using in startups, which is, if this is true, what else is true, right? Like when you're doing an improv scene and something wacky happens, it's like, if this is true, what is the world we're living in? So I love applying that here, right? Because if you take what you just said and we say, okay, well, that's true, then what does that mean about what else is true? Well, what it means, in addition to, okay, you've defined your value prop in this way, and your best customers are the ones that are also, using SalesLoft in your case, then what else is true? Well, what it means is that all those companies who are customers of SalesLoft, but not yet customers of yours, are maybe the highest qualified, ideal customer profile businesses for you on the planet.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the value story and winning these cases where you happen to have this kind of coincidental intersection or Venn diagram between your accounts, but that you can now actually say, now that I know this to be true, how do I think about actually formulating a growth strategy for my business and recruiting new accounts? And this is where you start to get into the world of account mapping and account collaboration and co-selling and cross-selling with your partners. And this is also where it's great if you've got that one partner in SalesLoft. It gets even better when you think about what are the other companies that are out there where the overlap of our ideal customer profile is extremely significant. How can I find them and measure it And then how do I multiply this fire hose of potential leads
Yeah,
as a result?
and I mentioned sales ops on the side, but actually, like I'd say we have 100, like 100
Incredible. Yeah.
with sales engagement platforms and LinkedIn automation platforms. Like fundamentally, any platform that you use to reach out to customers en masse, SendSpark
Yeah.
fits in as this unique, video component
Yeah.
to that outreach strategy. I'd like to kind of take a step back, and again, I can geek out on partnerships and the real like nitty gritty of partnerships. I realize that there's probably go-to-market professionals that are watching this that maybe don't have a partner program at all,
Yeah.
right? And so I wonder if you have an opinion on, and let's just go early stage company that's like, hey, we want to be partner led. Like, what are some of the building blocks that you think they could put in place to begin a partner program? And I think even from the extent of like, do I need to go out and hire somebody? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? Like, what are some of the opinions that you have? And you've lived it, right? You built a company on a partner strategy. Like, why did you make that decision, and then how did you like resource it to actually bring it to life, so to speak?
Yeah. There's I published a book earlier this year. We're really lucky to be able to partner with Wiley and release this book called Ecosystem Led Growth. I've always got one sitting on my
Nice.
countertop there. And there's a section in the book that just kind of raises exactly the question that you're describing, which is how do I know if ecosystem-led growth is right for me? When do I know, and when that moment happens, that it actually is right? And the answer to that, there's kind of it's one of these things where like two conditions need to be met. And I described the answer in this 2x2 matrix of, on one dimension, it's just the absolute scale of your company. And on the other dimension, it's the strength of what I call the ecosystem DNA of the value proposition of your company. So the scale dimension is obvious, which what scale does is it speaks to how much resistance you are going to face in attempting to building an ecosystem around your company. Like, is in every single partner relationship, are you going to be the mouse versus the elephant, and you're going to be the smaller player, or have you reached a scale where maybe you have a peer set of companies that are kind of at your scale that are up and comers, where you might have this more toe-to-toe standing, but of course you also have some elephants in the room that you want to be working with? Or are you literally an elephant, right? And everybody surrounding you is a mouse, and they're all dying to work with your customer base. So you've got this massive market pool to cultivate a big ecosystem. Because we work with so many large legacy enterprises at Crossbeam, we actually find all three of those cases, right? Like, there are plenty of companies that are enormous and have spent very little time figuring out how to do this stuff well. And then you find like tiny companies just starting out in Y Combinator that are like talking about ecosystem like growth all day, right? So you get that full spectrum on the scale side, which is why the other dimension is important. The ecosystem DNA piece just says how much of your customer's value proposition in using the most compelling, fundamental initial use case of your product is dependent upon you existing in the ecosystem in which you exist. Now, in the case of Stitch, which I just gave, it was like fully dependent, because you literally, to use Stitch, you had to like suck data out of a SaaS tool and deposit it in a data warehouse. If you don't have a data warehouse, you can't use Stitch, which means those data warehouses are these like existentially required ecosystem partners of ours that are literally built into the business model.
Yep.
Now, that's a middleware company, right? It's an extreme example, but you can look at almost any business that exists in your case example, right? Like, look at Scott Brinker's annual like chief MarTech, giant blob graphic of all the marketing companies, right? Chances are the majority of those need to very harmoniously coexist with other pieces of the marketing or sales technology stack in order for their end users to actually be able to use their products in their totality, right? And that would lean me toward like a greater than 50% ecosystem DNA driven value proposition. Now, look, if you are a totally standalone, like installed point solution piece of software, like vertical SaaS very often is, or something that kind of comes in a more legacy kind of format, or maybe you're not a SaaS product at all, and you're something that's got some kind of like hardware consumption endpoint or something, you can have 0% ecosystem DNA. You can be like a point solution that's individually deployed. So you got to do that math, right? So you've got your scale and you've got your ecosystem DNA. And then what you get is this very beautiful like 2x2 matrix, because if you have very low scale and very low ecosystem DNA, the answer to your question is actually like, maybe don't spend your time on this yet. And there are probably ways that you can better validate your market hypothesis and build your initial scale in your business without trying to go partner first, because you're going to hit a lot of uphill resistance in doing it. Now, the three other boxes is where it gets interesting, right? the top right box where you have amazing ecosystem DNA and amazing scale, this is like the holy grail, right? This is your publicly traded SaaS companies that exist on the Bessemer Cloud Index that are like the fastest growing companies in the world. There's not a company on that list that doesn't use Crossbeam, which is awesome. And those businesses are just rocking and rolling, and they use the ecosystem as the tip of the spear. Once you get to a certain point of
let's do some
scale.
actual names, right? Because like I think when I look at companies that actually have perfected partnerships, you look at
Yeah.
Microsoft, you look at AWS, you look at are there any other companies that you'd throw out as honorable mention so people can have a perspective of like what these companies are from like
Oh, of course. Like look at Shopify
yeah
in the retail universe, right? Take a look at CrowdStrike in the cybersecurity universe. Think about companies like Snowflake in the modern data warehouses world, which has an enormous kind of marketplace business and partner ecosystem, as you can imagine. HubSpot in the CRM universe, right, where you go to inbound at any point in time, their live event, you realize just how incredibly partner driven that is. These are you run up and down that list of like the Cloud 100 or whatever, and it's actually hard to find a company where it actually doesn't feel like, oh, this company is more than just a company, it's a platform. And when you are a platform, inherently people are building their entire businesses on the premise that you exist in the first place, which literally is the definition of like this ecosystem
yeah
dynamic, right?
yeah
Bill Gates has this great quote where he was asked, the Microsoft partner ecosystem, you're right, is like maybe the greatest ecosystem to ever exist. And he said at one point, like, you don't actually have an ecosystem unless the GDP of that ecosystem is greater than the GDP of your own underlying company, right? Like,
yeah
you should be making more money for your partners than you are generating for yourself by virtue of those partnerships existing. And I think when you get to like public company scale and further, that becomes more and more inevitable. And that's part of the mentality around it. But yeah, to complete the original answer to your question, right? Like, most companies actually fall in one of those other two boxes. And I think the question you asked about like, how do I know if I'm ready? That person is in that bottom right box, which is where they probably have pretty high ecosystem DNA, but very low scale.
yeah
And the question is, what do you do there to actually validate it? So I'll answer the question just for that box for the sake of time, which is in that particular box, this is where solutions like Crossbeam and account mapping data become so valuable, because Crossbeam has a free tier that allows you to sign up and connect with other companies and you can do a bunch of really cool stuff before you actually start opening your wallet to invest in the platform. One of the things that you can do is you can partner with as many companies as you want and start doing this initial analysis just of how much your customer sets and your sales pipelines overlap. And you don't have to share the identities of those companies if you don't want. You can actually do like roll up statistics just to look at like what percent of my sales pipeline is in their customer base today. What percent of my sales pipeline is in their sales pipeline today? If they or you happen to share that data, then you can also learn which companies those are, right? And you can start to look at things like, when we do have a customer in common, is the ACV higher or lower than the rest of our customer population? Did the deal close faster or slower? Is the churn rate higher or lower? And you start to be able to understand the way in which coexisting with someone in one of those stacks actually has this ripple effect implication on the quality and the performance of a sales deal that might emerge from that universe of customers and a customer relationship that then might come true. And that is so incredibly powerful, because it starts to get you into this virtuous cycle of being able to crystallize who your ideal customer profile is and where that customer is doing business already today, which allows you to figure out the go-to-market side of these partnerships and ultimately, to your point, right, which integrations to build, et cetera. So like the starting point, the jumping off point to me is, you can do all of that data analysis before you write a single line of code, before you build a single integration, before you sign into these giant partnership agreements. Just canvassing the universe of companies you might potentially partner with and doing some initial analysis to understand like the serviceable, obtainable market at the middle of the Venn diagram between you and that business. Pretty soon, if you look at a dozen companies that you might integrate with, you're going to have a really crystal clear answer as to which ones are the duds and which ones are the ones that are really compelling. And if they're all duds, then that's pretty valuable too. And maybe another case where it's like, I should pump the brakes and grow by another 2x or 4x before I reevaluate the space.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because like fundamentally one thing that I like to take away from these calls is like something tactical or a go to market play that people can implement right tomorrow. One thing that you mentioned at the start, which kind of links into this account mapping data, let's just say hypothetically, I've got an integration built, and again, we'll use SalesLoft in this example, right? I'm on Crossbeam. I've now got my list of accounts where we overlap. What is like the step to close these deals, right? Because I think
Yeah.
we always get into this, right? Conceptually, like, data mapping, unbelievable. Now I've got my list of accounts. And you probably are privy to a lot of companies that are using this data, running really creative plays or tactics to convert them into meetings and close one revenue. I wondered if you could give like maybe a play that you've seen be used, and it could just be, maybe a cold email campaign that focuses
Yeah.
on companies. Maybe you could give the audience a sneak peek at something like that.
Yeah, totally. I'll give you one from the top of the funnel, but one of the things that's cool in the ecosystem like growth book is like the whole back half of the book kind of walks down your whole sales funnel, and it's a bunch of these playbooks broken out depending on your function and kind of what outcomes you're trying to achieve. Because there really are ones all the way from lead generation to opportunity qualification to opportunity conversion to account expansion and so on. But at the very, very top of the funnel, this is so cool. I was just on a webinar with one of our customers about this. We, for example, have an integration with Clay. Clay is like this data enrichment kind of sales ops automation, like campaign initiation tool. It's super badass. And you can, if you have Crossbeam set up, then you can use Crossbeam as a data source into Clay. And what you can do is pull into Clay. You can say, okay, I'm only interested in companies that are in my prospect list, which means like they're not qualified opportunities yet. They're definitely not customers. They're the companies that I wish I was selling to. But I only want to pull them in if they are companies that are also customers of partner X, Y, and Z, right? So then you're in Clay and you're ingesting, okay, I've got these 720 companies that like I wish I was selling to, and they're already customers with these other businesses. You have a column that tells you which other business they're a customer of. And then you can kind of use Clay to do a bunch of additional enrichment around kind of attaching the context and the titles and the other information about who you might go after. And then you use that to actually kick off these campaigns inside of, say, SalesLoft, for example, where you are then going to customize the messaging and the approach and the pitch based on the fact that you know that they are already adopting solutions in a particular ecosystem or in a particular direction. You might highlight the integration that you have. You might tell the story a little bit differently around a particular part of your value that is very often most realized when this integration is turned on. Or you might qualify or disqualify someone from deeper investment, like an ABM campaign, ads that follow them around, et cetera, based on saying, hey, they're already using a bunch of our partners who are big enterprise clients, and we know their ACV is like 10 times our size. This is a company that's opening their wallet in a meaningful way in our space, and that probably could be more of an enterprise account as opposed to ones that are buying a bunch of SMB tools that maybe say, okay, we're not going to spend ad dollars on this, but we'll do a drip campaign, right? So you can take what you know about what's going on in the rest of their technology stack and who they're engaging with and how recently they're engaging with them, and use that as a way to do qualification, segmentation, personalization, and automation. And when you're doing all those things, that's the modern selling stack, right? And Crossbeam just becomes this incredible power of like proprietary knowledge and extra dimensionality that lets you
I
unlock.
love that play. I mean, I've been we use Clay a lot at SendSpark, so we know the power of the tool. I mean, one other campaign that we run, which is kind of similar, is a lookalike audience where if we've
Yeah.
got an extremely good customer that we're driving results for, we actually use a platform called Ocean.io, pulls through similar lead list. But to your point, and I think what's important to note is once you have that data, it actually makes the messaging that forms the part of the outbound campaign so much more targeted. So you mentioned like, hey, this is how a customer would use X integration. You can also start to layer in specific case studies of somebody that's used SendSpark and SalesLoft and are generating 3x higher reply rates. It in an age where what we're looking for in outbound is personalization and relevance, having data sources like, to your point, platforms that they already use, people they already partner with, gives you a leg up. And again, it's a layer of research that's provided for you, which you can then base really solid
Mhm.
outbound on, in my opinion, as well.
Yep, I think that is totally fair, and it's the fun thing is, as your company achieves scale, your ecosystem grows in proportion, and then this data set and this asset also grows in proportion. So it's like economical, it's scalable, it's actionable.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the big three in the modern go to market world.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, Bob, I think you've given people a lot to think about. I think just to recap, ecosystem-led growth is something that I think is an extremely powerful motion to put in place. I think Bob's gone through, hey, this is how you can figure out if now's the time to maybe do it, and specifically if you're in that top right quadrant, to Bob's point, or kind of bottom right quadrant, could be worth kind of taking a look at. And then I love the play that Bob suggested around, hey, sign up for Crossbeam. There's a free tier, get some data ingested, push it into a platform like Clay, and then actually generate really good top of funnel through the use of qualified outbound. Bob, anything that you'd leave the audience with from a kind of final tip or trick, or I guess a component of partnerships or ecosystem like growth in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really if you've been an operator for more than a couple of years out there, I really encourage folks to forget everything you knew about partnerships, right? And we didn't get into the history of partnerships too much. I'm kind of glad, because it's a bit of a slog, but there's kind of a new sheriff in town when it comes to how this stuff creates value for companies, and it's something to get really excited about.
Cool. Well, Bob, thanks so much for jumping on. If anybody's interested, Bob's on LinkedIn, and Crossbeam, phenomenal platform. We use it here at SendSpark, and so free tier, people can give it a go. But Bob, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Cool. Thank you, Ben. Always a pleasure.